Hi campers, welcome back to the Westbury Arts Summer Camp. We are now in week 5 of the program, and this week we're going to be covering the artwork of American artist James Lavadour. So first, we need to go over our supplies. You're going to be needing 2 sheets of your heavyweight watercolor paper, which is the thicker, smaller sheets of paper. You're also going to need your bleeding tissue paper, which should be the really colorful paper in your Ziploc bag. You're also going to be needing your markers, your watercolor palettes, your brushes, a cup of water, and a paper towel or a cloth for drying. Alright, that does it for the materials. Let's get started. James Lavadour is a Native American artist who resides in the Umatilla Reservation in what is now Oregon. His artwork is really well known for the landscape nature of it. His use of color is really bold. His composition is always usually really striking, and you'd think that with mountain scenes they'd usually be really peaceful and whatnot, but his works always have this really great energy to them, and he says that a lot of his inspiration comes from things like jazz music, Chinese paintings, and abstract expressionism. And abstract expressionism is actually something that we covered not too long ago when we were studying Basquiat, actually. And abstract expressionism uses things like line, shape, and color to really evoke specific emotions. So when we look at James Lavadour's work, we'll notice that he uses really bold and saturated colors, and they're composed usually really uniquely in a way that evokes this feeling of a space, specifically with the overlapping of these shapes. You'll notice that some of the things in the background are a little more dull, are a little more faded, and the things that are in the front are usually a lot more crisp and a lot more dark. But when you go on to other paintings, his paintings almost look a little more abstract in the sense that it no longer feels like we are looking at landscape, but instead we're just looking at a variety of clashing colors. But this is the technique that James Lavadour uses to really express his own ideas and his own feelings about the nature that surrounds him. And that's really something that I want to study with you all today. He mentioned earlier that his inspiration came from Chinese paintings, specifically these types of paintings where the geography would be very stylized and would be very, very meticulously applied to paper. And you'll notice that when you look a little closer, you'll notice that there are these really fine and small details within each of these mountains, and it's the color is really beautifully applied as well. And when you look at it, I imagine that you gain some sense of peace, of harmony, and I think that's definitely something that you can find in James Lavadour's work. In here you can also see that the way these mountains are sort of layered on top of each other. When looking at this painting, you'll know that the use of color here isn't very abstract, but there's still this sense of design at work that usually always focuses on the beauty of the mountainous ranges. And that's really what I want us to focus on today. We're going to use our bleeding tissue paper to construct our very own landscapes, and then we're going to go back into these what we've done with the bleeding tissue paper, and we're going to start adding detail to them with our markers. Alright, so let's get started. So to start us off, make sure you have your water, your markers, your bleeding tissue paper, and your white sheet of paper in front of you, as well as your brush. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your bleeding tissue paper, you're going to rip a piece off. It doesn't really matter what size or what color you choose, but you're going to lay it on top of your white sheet of paper, and then you're going to start applying water to it, kind of like this. And you want to make sure that you cover the entire area. And it's going to be great because you'll eventually note that a lot of the color that is on the bleeding tissue paper is going to stay on the white sheet of paper, but all you need to do is really just make sure that you spread as much water as you can all over the sheet of paper. And one thing that I want to stress is you want this project to feel spontaneous and unexpected. So make sure you use random shapes. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be perfectly cut, and just make sure, of course, that you get as much water as you can on top of them. And another thing that I'm going to encourage is overlap too, because once you mix these two colors together, you'll notice that a third color appears, and I think that's a pretty cool effect. Another cool thing about this is when you lift up the paper, you'll notice that a lot of the marks that you see are pretty unexpected. And that's really something that I want to stress about this project is I want you to really experiment That's something that I really want to stress about this project is I want you to think about spontaneity and energy and sort of bold and brash color choices, and not really worry about it looking too perfect or specific. You're really just letting the tissue paper do the work here, and once you're finished, you'll end up with an entire barrage of colors laid on top of each other, and this is going to be the foundation for our drawings later. And I should tell you that there's really no limit to how many colors you apply to this. It really is up to you, and it really depends on the tissue paper that you have. If you do not have tissue paper, using your watercolor palette is just fine. And once you finish applying all the color, you will be ready for the next step, which is, well, first you have to let it dry, of course. Then you can move on and start adding details with the markers. As you're adding details with the markers, I want you to take some inspiration from the paintings that I managed to show you and start adding the really broad strokes and start adding the more finer details to these landscapes. I'm going to encourage you to use like the broader side of your marker because that creates like these really cool broad brush strokes, and then use the tip to create thinner lines. And what you're going to do is you're really just going to allow yourself to kind of randomly place your marks. I'm going to encourage you to create random marks with your marker, with of course the idea of mountains in the back of your mind, because remember, these are supposed to be landscapes. So what would a typical mountain view look like? There would usually be a lot of rocks, maybe some trees, a lot of sharp jagged edges, or maybe a little more rounder edges. It really is up to you to really just fill the entire space with as much detail as you can. These don't have to be necessarily perfect. There really is no definition of perfect here. What you do really is you think back on the artworks that I showed you by James Lavadour, and you let that inspire you as you make these. And of course, it doesn't hurt to look at some of his inspirations as well. He mentioned that some of the things that inspire him are things like Chinese paintings, jazz, and of course abstract expressionism. And turning back to the abstract expressionism lesson, the idea is to create marks, colors, lines, shapes that really express specific emotions. So maybe you want to show a peaceful landscape or a dangerous landscape, or a landscape that just feels summery or wintry. Whatever the case, you allow yourself to create marks that you feel align with what emotion you are trying to evoke. And that's really the goal here. One thing that I really enjoyed about James Lavadour and learning about him was that he actually devoted a lot of his time and his skills to creating art programs within his own community. And I think that's something important to think about, because I think that's something important to talk about, because as we age, we'll learn that there are specific gaps within our communities that need to be filled. And sometimes those gaps come in the form of, like, say there aren't enough art resources for students. James Lavadour saw that there weren't enough art programs within his community, so he felt like he needed to take on that challenge of actually providing the necessary materials and the necessary skills and time and money to create these art programs. And I think that that's pretty cool. So as you're making this, again, just remember that these are supposed to be spontaneous and free, and you basically create whatever marks you want that evoke this idea of us seeing nature, of us seeing mountains, and us seeing how you want to show these mountains, how you perceive these mountains, and what emotions you really want to show off. I find this really peaceful and almost kind of meditative, because I'm allowing myself to just make as many marks as I feel like I need to, and I get to decide when I'm finished. And once you feel like you're finished, you should end up with a work that really shows off how you're able to work with really spontaneous and kind of unexpected mediums, and how you're able to make it unique, and how you're able to take inspiration from what you've learned today and really apply it to your own work. So that does it for today's class. Thank you so much for joining me in studying the work of James Lavadour. I really hope you enjoyed it. I can't wait for our next class. It will be our last class together, unfortunately, but I really hope that you've been keeping up and that you've been enjoying all the projects that I've had to share with you all. So until next time, be safe, be healthy, and I will see you then. Take care.